So Ruth and Naomi returned to Bethlehem, and it was the beginning of the barley harvest. That's where we left off the story of these two women last week. Two people whose story is told in one of the shortest books of the Bible, only 4 chapters long, sandwiched in between the book of Joshua about all kinds of battles and heroism, and the book of Judges, which was a violent and disturbing time in the life of Israel. Right in the middle of that is the 4 little chapters of the book of Ruth. Naomi, who had at the beginning of the chapter, the beginning of the book, left her homeland of Bethlehem to go to another place because her homeland of Bethlehem had been affected by a famine and there was no food. And so Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their 2 sons packed up and moved to a brand new land. Their life was good for a while. Plenty of food, even wives for the husbands. But then Naomi's husband died, and then her 2 sons died. And there were 3 women left not only bereft, but incredibly vulnerable in that time and in that place. And 2 of the women, Naomi and one of the daughters-in-law named Ruth, head back to Bethlehem because Naomi had heard that there was food there once again. And these 2 grieving, vulnerable, insecure women arrived back at the beginning of the barley harvest. That's where the story left off. Today the story continues, and it gives us a particular insight into how it is those ancient Hebrews regarded the gifts of the harvest. We're in the season of Thanksgiving, where traditionally farmers would have been bringing in the bounty of their crops, setting aside some for others, and giving thanks to God for that bounty. And in this story, we hear how that got lived out. Because in the very code, the law, that was given to the Hebrew people while they were still wandering in the wilderness, they were told, don't farm, don't harvest all the way out to the end of your fields. Leave 10% for the hungry, for the poor, for the widowed, for the orphaned among you. Today I invite us to hear this story of how that was done in Ruth's time. And then we'll hear 2 other stories from Josh Simon and then from Mike Buttram about neither one of them being farmers, much like most of the rest of us in this room, but who, in fact, like you, like me, like Boaz, like Ruth, Naomi, like all God's people, have been given particular gifts to use for the common good. And I invite us to consider this ancient story, their stories, and then we take time to consider our own story. You may not be a farmer. You may not even be a gardener. But God has blessed each one of us in this room with gifts to share for the common good. So let our hearts and our lives be open to the reading, hearing, and understanding of this ancient story, and then of those new stories. And in between, we sing some harvest kinds of hymns. But also keep in mind, what's your story? What gifts has God given you to share for the common good? Let our hearts and our lives be open to the reading, hearing, and understanding, and the singing of all this good news.
Hear the story of the reaping of the barley harvest found in Ruth 2, verses 1 to 18. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I might find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech, Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now, without resting for even a moment. At mealtime, Boaz said to Ruth, "Come here and eat some of this bread, and dip your morsel in the sour wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, "Let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She picked it up and came into the town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gleaned. Then Ruth took out and gave her mother-in-law what was left over after she herself had been satisfied. May God add blessing to the reading and understanding of this word.
Actually, contrary to popular belief, to the dismay of many of my fellow students at UW Milwaukee, where I was an undergrad, I actually did not grow up on a farm. The farm actually had been sold many years prior, and we lived on the property that my grandparents had farmed for so many years. And they were very fortunate to also have, to receive a grant from the state of Wisconsin to plant trees all on the former farmland. And they would receive money every year so long as they continued to leave the trees up and not have, and don't grow anything. Unfortunately, my parents bought a house and built a house there, and then my parents wanted to build another house, and then it was next door. Once my parents had a bit more money, then they could build a more ideal house. It's a fun story because that is where I come from. I come from northeast Wisconsin, where I was raised by a mother who has primarily spent most of her time being a person who's cleaned houses, and my father who has spent most of his time working, fixing machines in manufacturing shops. And only a few years ago did he actually decide to move up and get a position within the union itself. Very, very quite proud of him for doing those things. It is those types of understandings that I understand the need that there is for us to speak about injustice in the world. It is through those experiences from my own family of struggling to make ends meet. Sort of a fun story that I sometimes tell is that in order to get Christmas gifts at the end of the year, my father would have to cash in his raccoon pelts in order to have enough money to buy Christmas gifts for us. It's sort of a redneck down type thing in Wisconsin, but it is all of those ways that I really have connected to a broader sense of the earth and the environment and how we all depend upon those types of things. And as I said earlier in the morning session, I truly believe that we are all interconnected because at the beginning of worship, breathe in God's gifts. And the air our breath draws in has circled the globe. It is the same air Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi breathed. Air connects all of humanity together. The smokestacks located in the west or the east, north or the south have a global impact. We are all connected. And we also, I should say, and I feel very much like Ruth. Ruth traveled to a land and a people not of her own because of the gift she had to care for her mother-in-law. Now, I moved about 1,000 miles and still within the United States, but I decided to be on this journey quite some time ago. And it began with the recognition of gifts of speech, empathy, listening, and compassion, matched with the desire to contribute to the good of all creation. I came to United to strengthen my gifts, to grow new ones, and to learn firsthand from this community of faith how you use your gifts for the good of all. I want to continue to use my gifts to help people make connection between their daily lives and the daily lives of others. I want to be an advocate, and I also want to be someone who helps empower folks. I was very fortunate as a young man to have teachers who empowered me. And J.K. Rowling also. 'Cause if it wasn't for Harry Potter, I would not have a love of reading. But it is those types of people in my life who empowered me to recognize that I do have gifts of speech, who did help me recognize that I have a deep sense of empathy and compassion. And one of my responsibilities in this world is to help empower you all be able to see your ministries and to see the way that you can contribute to the strength of this church, to the strength of this community, and to the strength of our global economy, our global world. And I just want to say thank you for letting me be here this year to learn from you, and I hope some of you learn from me as well, that we all have mutual gifts, and these mutual gifts are a way for us to really grow the church, grow the community around us, contribute to the common good of all. Thank you.
I'm not quite as tall as Josh. Every experience that we have in our life offers us an element of perspective. And as we gain new perspective, the person who we are is further shaped and defined. There is one type of perspective, though, that doesn't come from our own personal experience at all. It's the experience that we gain in viewing the world through another's eyes. And each time we're opened up to this type of perspective, each time we're allowed to glimpse the world through another's eyes, is something that I've learned to consider, even if it's only for a moment, a true gift from God. Boaz must have experienced this holy moment of perspective when he looked upon Naomi and Ruth, and he saw the humanity within. He recognized the world through their eyes, and he acted accordingly. These moments of perspective enable us to come to understand how it is that we are to use any of the other gifts that God has given us in order to serve mankind, to do something nice, to contribute to the common good. So when I had shortly graduated from college, I took a job teaching at an inner city school in Denver, and one of my other duties as assigned there was to man the back gate, the parking lot gate, every morning. I didn't have a first period class, and so I would let the cars in. I would check people coming in and out and make sure they were members of our school. And then I would lock up the gate and walk back in. And almost without fail, there was a certain car who every morning after I had locked up, I'm walking back, beep, 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 would be honking, Mr. B, wait up. And so this was the mother of Stevie Ray. And Stevie Ray was one of my favorite students. He was a hilarious kid. He had very bright, and just a real contagious laugh. Great kid to be around. But I must admit that I was pretty judgmental of the situation as I interpreted it. At first, I saw a mom who lived very close to the school. I know she lived close to the school. And I just couldn't believe that not even once a week would they be on time. So it was probably my own impatience and my frustration for the situation that was the catalyst for my asking. But one morning I said, hey, can I offer to help? Can I give Stevie a ride to school? I don't think it was for the right reasons that I initially made that offer. But I did, in fact, make it. It was the gratitude in her eyes and the way she responded that really was that first element in this lesson of perspective that I was to gain. Picking Stevie up was not a big deal for me. Most days of the week it was, or most weeks it was probably 2 days a week, sometimes 3 or 4 days a week. And I got to know his mom and his sister pretty well, and I really quickly understood just how mistaken I was to judge. I understood how much it took for this mom just to keep things together, She was working nights, weekends, evenings, and the 7th grade sister of Stevie was the one who was watching Stevie during these hours. So that earlier judgment that I'd had quickly turned to shame in myself for having done so. Through that experience, that single experience, that was an informative moment for me, and it informed the way I would look at the world ever since. That experience gave me a lens. God granted me a lens through which to view the world. And there have been so many other experiences like it that have taught me to view these big picture problems, poverty, inequality, at a much more individual level, to recognize that there is a story behind each one of these major issues. And that while it's easy to categorically judge them, label them, or just dismiss them as being too big for us to handle individually or do anything about, it made me recognize that if I looked close enough, there is a part that I can play in helping to alleviate somebody's suffering or some injustice being done, even if it's a small part. Giving Stevie Ray a ride to school was a very small thing. The only talent it took was the fact that I was single without kids. And I had 10 minutes in the morning to actually get up and get there. And the fact that I had a truck that, most of the time at least. But God gives so many gifts, and each of these can be used for the common good. Without the perspective, though, to engage in another's reality through their moment, those gifts do lay fallow and unused and neglected. So I want to thank God for the gift of perspective, that gift which has allowed me to look through another's eyes and view the world just for a moment from their perspective. This is what truly has enabled me to do anything that I consider my best showing in this human experience. It's what's enabled me to stand up and be brave on behalf of another, or to work hard for someone else's behalf. And it's also what has informed me when I'm not living up to that, and lets me know when I'm falling short of that standard. In the end, I thank God for this gift because it will enable me to be the man I want my sons to call their father. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Mike. We've now heard 3 stories, one from long ago and far away, and 2 from our own midst. Stories of how it is God has blessed people with gifts to share for the common good. And so in this next part of the service, we invite you simply to take some time and consider how that might be true in your life. In your bulletin, there's a goldenrod sheet of paper that has 2 questions on it. One is, what are the gifts that God has given you to share for the common good? It could be the kinds of gifts that Mike or Josh talked about. It could be a gift of a particular skill or talent or aptitude. It could be the gift of a difficult experience that you can now use to help someone else going through a hard time. One time when I asked a congregation that question, one of the retired people said, I've been given the gift of time finally to do what it is I think I should be doing. What gift have you been given for the common good? And then a second question is, what do you need from the church, from God, from whomever, to be able to live into that gift more fully? In whatever ways God has been calling you, what gifts has God given you, and what do you need to live into those gifts more fully? We invite you to take some time. If you have a pen or pencil and want to write down your answers, that's fine. If you want to take this home and share it around your Thanksgiving table in a couple weeks with family and friends. If you want to write down whatever you want to write down and put it in the offering plate to be shared later on or to be given back to God. But take a few moments. Consider at this moment in your life, this stage of your life, what gifts have you been given to share with the common good? And then we'll close this time with a wonderful Thanksgiving hymn for the fruit of all creation. That, yes, is rooted in farming and gardening and all those good things, but also talks about all the things that God calls us to be about, and all the ways God calls us and all the gifts God gives us to live out that calling.